All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Most of us probably know the story of The Sorcerer's Apprentice. You immediately picture that famous animated sequence with Mickey Mouse running around in an absolute panic. But today, we're stepping far away from the animation studio. We are going way back to 1797, to Johann Wolfgang von Goethe's original classic poem. And we're going to look at this iconic piece of literature through a completely different lens, exploring it as a profound, seriously chilling, clinical map of the human psyche.
Goethe's original vision actually strips away all those playful preconceptions we might have. He was known as one of Germany's greatest poets and a total master of the parable, blending mischief and humor with very real, visceral danger. In fact, the sources describe this poem not as some light-hearted bedtime story, but as a grim, mythical fable. It's a harsh, cautionary tale about youthful arrogance and the sheer, absolute chaos that follows when we play with forces we don't fully understand. Goethe makes this incredibly sharp distinction for us. It's one thing to have the spark to start a fire, but it is an entirely different thing to possess the wisdom to actually control the flame.
So to really get this, we have to view the characters not as literal people, but as fragmented parts of our own psyche. Let's start with the Master. In this psychological anatomy, the Master isn't just some old bearded wizard. He represents the integrated superego. He's our higher consciousness. He is the ultimate source of self-command, restraint, and the internal symbolic law that keeps our mental world functioning smoothly. Basically, he's that gold standard of discipline we all strive for, a standard that, frankly, takes immense, exhausting labor to actually achieve.
Then, standing in direct, polar opposition, we have the apprentice. He perfectly represents the immature, unformed ego. He wants all the shiny rewards of mastery, but without doing any of the menial, boring labor of psychic discipline. When the master leaves the house, the apprentice is left totally alone with his own ambition and his youthful arrogance. He craves the master's power, sure, but his fundamental drive is just wanting to avoid hard work. He's the unformed ego desperately looking for a shortcut.
Now picture this dark, shadowy workshop. It serves as this brilliant metaphor for the internal battleground of our own minds when the Master, that voice of restraint, is away. This space isn't just a physical room with dusty books. It represents the container of the human psyche itself. It's the exact spot where that fundamental tension between the unformed ego and the integrated superego plays out. And what happens in this workshop when the adult leaves the room? Well, the ego decides it's time to experiment. And here is where we hit the core disconnect. The apprentice has the knowledge to ignite a psychic process, but he tragically, dangerously lacks the wisdom to control it. He's been watching the master, right? So he has the spark, that superficial, surface-level knowledge needed to just set things in motion, but he completely lacks the flame, the deep, stabilizing wisdom and the internal discipline required to regulate those forces once they're unleashed. It's the ultimate danger of half-knowledge.
Act 1 of our clinical case study is all about unleashing the id. The unformed ego wants a shortcut, so it projects its own lazy desires onto a broomstick. Instead of doing the grueling work of fetching water himself, the apprentice enchants this inanimate object to do his bidding. Psychologically speaking, this is pure projection. The ego is taking its own unrefined desires for ease and projecting them onto an external force. By waking up the broomstick, he's essentially activating the unrestrained primal impulses of the id, demanding it serve his immediate wants.
Things escalate incredibly fast, and it happens in 3 pretty horrifying steps. First, the spell is cast, and the broom obeys. Second, the broom starts fetching water, but it does so with this relentless, blind efficiency. It's an unrefined impulse, so it has no idea when to stop. And then comes step 3, the terrifying realization. The apprentice forgot the check word. Talk about a massive failure of psychic integration. He figured out how to push the gas pedal all the way down, but he has absolutely zero idea where the brakes are.
Now, this overflowing water isn't just a plumbing issue, it represents a massive deluge of the unconscious, flooding the container of the psyche completely beyond its limits. Ironically, the spell's success is exactly what causes the danger. The water just keeps coming, inundating the house, the cellar, the garden. In our psychoanalytic model, this water is that overwhelming flood of unconscious material and unrefined emotional energy. The mind's workshop is overflowing, and as that water level rises, so does the ego's absolute horror and panic.
Which brings us to a huge, really critical question for anyone studying the desperate mind. How does an overwhelmed ego regain control when it's literally drowning in its own unleashed impulses? When higher reason and wisdom are completely off the table, what is the default knee-jerk reaction of a panicked mind?
Well, instead of trying to process or integrate this overwhelming force, the panicked ego completely freaks out. It resorts to violence without understanding, taking an axe to the very process it started. The apprentice doesn't pause to remember the check word. He doesn't try to actually understand the magic. He just desperately wants the discomfort to stop right now. So he grabs a weapon, violently attacks the conduit of the impulse, and splits the broom right down the middle.
This physical splitting of the broom is a perfect, literal representation of a maladaptive defense mechanism. It's a classic failure of psychic integration. Think about it. When a healthy mind faces an overwhelming emotion or a dark impulse, it tries to process and regulate it. But a panicked, unformed mind, it uses defense mechanisms like repression or splitting. We try to violently sever that ugly part of ourselves, hacking it to pieces and burying it, just hoping that if we destroy it, it will magically disappear.
And we all know how that usually goes, right? The tragic consequence is that an impulse violently repressed doesn't just die, it comes back with twice the intensity to destroy the psyche. Goethe is warning us that force without understanding only breeds more destruction. The shattered pieces of the broom stand right back up. And now there are two water carriers, the deluge doubles. It's a vivid reminder that repressed psychological impulses multiply in the shadows, returning with twice the ferocity, leading straight to total ruin and a complete breakdown of internal order.
Just when absolute total ruin seems inevitable, the master finally walks back in. And notice what he does, or rather, what he doesn't do. He doesn't grab a bigger axe. He doesn't yell. He doesn't panic. The integrated superego steps back into the room and restores complete order using just a simple command. That linguistic code, the deep wisdom the apprentice lacked, instantly brings those chaotic, unruly impulses of the id right back under control, turning them back into harmless tools.
So what Goethe is ultimately teaching us here is that there are absolutely no shortcuts to the wisdom earned through labor and experience. The real goal of this whole psychological journey isn't to learn magic tricks, it's to achieve true mastery. And true mastery is defined not by your ability to ignite a process, but by the iron discipline required to govern it. You cannot safely command external power, those spirits of the world, until you've first achieved internal self-command. Magic, in this context, is really just a brilliant, powerful metaphor for self-discipline.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want you to take a hard look into your own dark workshop with this final provocative thought. We all have an inner apprentice constantly looking for an easy way out, and an inner master calling us toward the difficult work of discipline. So, what shortcuts are you taking to bypass the menial labor of discipline, and what untamed forces might you be unleashing in your own psyche as a result? Keep that in the back of your mind the next time you find yourself wishing for an easy magic spell to solve a difficult problem.